let's talk about Nightshade.
When will you stop betraying everyone?
Alright, formalities first. Nightshade is the sequel to the 2002 action platformer Shinobi. It was developed by Sega and released in Japan as Kunoichi in 2003, and North America and Europe as Nightshade in 2004. All Wikipedia articles aside, if you've seen my video on Shinobi, you would know that it is one of my favorite games of all time, despite its many flaws. Its simple concept, high skill ceiling, and straightforward but challenging yet satisfying gameplay set it apart from many of its contemporaries, which more or less felt like by-the-numbers 3D hack-and-slash games. If you want to know more about how I felt about that game, check the link for my Shinobi review in the comments. It's one of my older videos though, so it's a lot more painful to watch than what I'm churning out now. That slow talking made my videos twice as long as they needed to be. However, I will be explaining a lot of the core mechanics of both games in this video, so you don't have to watch that review in order to know what I'm talking about in this one. But if you want to know my in-depth thoughts on that game, then hippity hop on over to that video. With that out of the way, let's dig in. Nightshade largely follows in Shinobi's footsteps, which is why I'm going to be heavily comparing these two games for the duration of the review. But I couldn't help but feel that something was off during the time I spent with this game. I spent several hours racking my brain to figure out what didn't feel quite right, but then it hit me like a cleverly placed simile. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get to what specifically bothered me about Nightshade, let's start at square one, with the graphics and presentation. The graphics are the first thing you notice when you insert any game's PlayStation 2 disc into your PlayStation 2 and navigate through the menu, so it's only natural to talk about them first. A lot of people think that graphics make or break the game, but I'm inclined to disagree. Though graphics do matter, they only really make a tangible difference to gameplay when the game looks like Kylie Jenner's stretched out asshole. They are worth talking about, but I'd argue that graphics are simply one factor of a game's overall atmosphere. And a game can have bad graphics, but an overall great atmosphere. I'm taking us down this tangent because Nightshade is a much more colorful and graphically proficient game than Shinobi was, as it pushes the PlayStation 2's capabilities to the limit, but I think it's worth noting that Shinobi did atmosphere a lot better. The color palette in that game was much more muted, lending itself to the dark and serious story that Shinobi brought to the table, whereas Nightshade's tone isn't nearly as consistent. Everything feels a lot more video gamey, and less like an actual world. These overly colorful and bright graphics made the levels feel more arcadey, like they're just thrown together because the developers thought they would look cool to slice Hellspawn up in. Whereas the atmosphere in Shinobi felt like a natural progression through the ruined city of Tokyo. I will, however, say this. For what it's worth, Nightshade is one of the most graphically impressive games that I've played on the PlayStation 2. The soundtrack is largely forgettable, and I know I've been harping on about the first game, but the soundtrack in Shinobi had its fair share of bangers that I'd find myself humming while doing laundry because they were stuck in my head for some reason. There are a few decent songs in Nightshade, but two of those are only decent because they were straight up copied from Shinobi. However, the story of Nightshade is subpar, as there are many twists and turns that just fell flat. Shinobi's story is an almost Shakespearean tragedy about a young ninja named Hatsuma, whose clan was murdered and reanimated by an evil wizard named Hiroko. And he is tasked with hunting down the possessed bodies of his former comrades and defeating Hiroko, so Tokyo can be saved and his clan can be avenged. In that game, you encounter your former students, who have died and whose bodies are being controlled against their will by evil spirits. Nightshade is about a ninja working for the government, who is tasked with fighting her former master and fellow pupils in order to stop them and this company called Nakatomi Industries, which totally is not a name stolen from Die Hard, from attaining absolute power and reforging the accursed blade Akujiki from the first game. It felt more like a bad fanfiction that wallowed in the story of the original instead of meaningfully evolving it. There is one thing that Nightshade did do better, however, and that is the protagonist. Hibana is a much better protagonist than Hatsuma was because of, reasons. I'm kidding, it's because she didn't have the personality of an angry and sad cardboard box. She's like a cheesy 80s action movie hero, with equally cheesy one-liners that she delivers when she kills something. Her favorite one-liners to deliver usually involve informing herself or others that it is indeed not their day, delivered with some voice acting that belongs in either 90s anime dubs or the American pornographic industry.
Today's not my day. Today isn't your day. Today just isn't my day.
Though the story is a downgrade from Shinobi's and the presentation is debatably less effective, I have to say that the level design is improved in most areas. First of all, there is one thing that was conspicuously missing from Shinobi, and that's mid-mission checkpoints. If you've played Shinobi, you'd know how much of a godsend those are. The second is that the environments are a lot less repetitive, but some levels are a little too non-linear for their own good. This isn't much of a big deal though, because you'll never get really lost if you run around long enough. Only mildly lost. Aside from that, the only other complaint I have with the level design is the great value version of the Golden Palace from Shinobi in the last 2 chapters. The gameplay is where Nightshade really shines, which is a good thing because it's a, video game after all. All of the core mechanics from Shinobi are there. Here's a quick rundown of the combat system in this game, and Shinobi. Though it looks like a hack and slash game, it's really not. The idea is to kill weaker enemies first, who will raise your damage multiplier. Each enemy killed within a certain time frame increases your damage exponentially, so you can kill the big boys in 1 or 2 hits. You also get something called Tate, which shows a little animation of every enemy dying at the same time and Hibana saying a one-liner, if you kill all the enemies within a few seconds of one another. The animation also changes depending on the amount of enemies you kill, but it never gets old.
Today wasn't your day.
This seems simple enough, and it is, but the challenge is increased when flying enemies, armored enemies, and aerial combat over instant death pitfalls is factored in. The combat remains perfectly intact in this game, and I have to say that I enjoy fighting the regular enemies more in Nightshade than I did Shinobi. Hibana also has some nifty tricks up her sleeve that can more easily dispatch enemies. She can throw shurikens, which stun enemies but are essentially useless towards the end of the game, and she has this kick ability, which is probably the best improvement that Nightshade made. Basically, it breaks your enemy's guard, shatters their armor, or lets you get another movement in when you run out of jumps mid-air, provided there is a flying enemy close enough to your position. This kick is far superior to Hatsuma's thunder kick in the original, which only broke the enemy's guard and consumed a shuriken in the process. It was also difficult to pull off, whereas Hibana can do the can-can with a simple press of the triangle button. The main issue I had with the gameplay is the bosses. They're all just bad. This is what felt off about Nightshade, by the way. The other stuff I complained about was largely nitpicking, but this is a serious shortcoming of the game's design. In Shinobi, you had the potential to one-shot every boss in the game except the final boss, but he can eat a buffet of dicks. Basically, the bosses would summon 7 or 8 minions, and you could use the damage multiplier to kill any boss in 1 to 3 hits if you were agile enough. This was very difficult to pull off, but it was a fun and satisfying system that rewarded skill and risky play. Nightshade doesn't do that. Instead, it opts to have the boss's minions only marginally increase your damage multiplier. So it takes, according to my complex calculations, a metric assload of hits to kill every boss. This wouldn't be an issue if the bosses weren't so frustrating to fight. They are, more or less, the same bosses you'd fight in Shinobi with a twist here and there, but the problem I had with these bosses is magnified because you're forced to fight them for a prolonged period of time instead of several seconds after killing all of their minions and catching them at the perfect time. Therefore, you're not encouraged to make risky plays to quickly kill off these bosses and attain a high score, but instead take pot shots at them. Since it takes about 10 years to kill a boss using that method, and that's boring, I instead opted to cheese everyone to death, using my ninja magic and chakra attacks, the latter of which can be activated by holding square and unleashing a flurry of whatever the hell this is on an unsuspecting foe. So if there are any Nightshade experts in the comments, your criticisms of my playstyle will bounce off of me like arrows off of linoleum because I know I suck. Alright, that's all I have to say about Nightshade. Overall, I'd say this was a very good game, and I'd recommend playing it, after playing the 2002 version of Shinobi, of course. When it really comes down to it, this game is mostly just more Shinobi, and I can hardly say that's a bad thing. Make sure to tune into my stream at 10 PM on weeknights, and hopefully some other times, and be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you haven't already. That's all, and thanks for watching. Creamy out.